My name is Ron Gilbert, and I was the creator and designer of Monkey Island and the co-creator and designer of Maniac Mansion and also The Cave. I had started working at this company in California. I grew up in Oregon and I was living in Oregon, and I got a job at this company called Human Engineered Software, and I was doing Commodore 64 programming. Then I moved to California and they went out of business like 6 months after I got there. So I had moved back to Oregon and I was getting ready to go back to college, and phone rang one day and it was somebody from Lucasfilm, and they were looking for a Commodore 64 programmer. And they got my name from someone at this other company and just wanted to know if I would, come and interview for a job. And I'm like, wow. So I just packed up my car and moved back to California because I was going to get that job. There was no way I was not going to get that job. So I just moved back. Yeah. I remember Star Wars. I was like 12 years old when Star Wars came out, which is like the perfect age for that movie. And Lucasfilm, I just idolized that company and George Lucas and Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and being able to go work for the Lucasfilm Games group was like a dream come true. I had started doing Commodore 64 porting. So they had done a couple of games like Ball Blazer and Cronus Rift, and what I was doing was porting them from the Atari 400, 800 to the Commodore 64. So that's how I started. And I became good friends with Gary Winnick, who was an artist. I think he was the only artist at Lucasfilm Games at the time. And we just had we just loved like campy horror movies. And so we started putting together this game idea for this game, which eventually became Maniac Mansion. Back then, there really was no pitching process. The Lucasfilm Games group was 7 people, so it was a very, very small group. And we were always writing up little one-page design documents and just passing them around. And Maniac Mansion just started as one of those, one-page game design documents. And the more excited people became about ideas, the more likely that we would just kind of start making them. So there wasn't really a formal pitch process for Maniac Mansion. I had finished up a Maniac Mansion, and then I helped a little on Zach McCracken. Mostly I was doing the SCUM system at the time, so I did that, and then I started working on Monkey Island, and I worked on it for maybe 2 or 3 months. Then I got asked to work on the Indiana Jones graphic adventure. So David Fox and Noah Falstein and I went off and did that. So I took a little bit of a year-long break from Monkey Island while I did that. And during that whole process, I'd kind of formulated these rules for adventure game design. And I wrote an article for the Journal of Computer Game Design, I think it was called Why Adventure Games Suck. And I had these 15 rules that you follow to make adventure games. So Monkey Island, in a way, was me testing those rules out. I followed every one of those rules for every single puzzle in Monkey Island, just to see, are these rules really the right rules? And I think the design of Monkey Island really benefited, from those rules and following it. But yeah, I had no idea that the game would become as popular as it did. Also, this was pre-internet, so you'd release a game and you just wouldn't hear anything about it. 3 months later, an article would appear in a magazine reviewing it, but there was no way to really interact with the players, the fans. So it's a little bit of kind of a black hole that stuff sits in. And it really, probably wasn't, until 10 or so years after Monkey Island came out that I started to realize just how much of this cult game, that had become for a lot of people, especially in Europe. I'm really proud of that. I'm very proud of Maniac Mansion, and I'm very proud of, the 2 Monkey Island games. A lot of people come up to me and talk about how much those games meant to them growing up as kids, how those games are the reason that they're in the game business, making games. And it's hard not to feel really good about that at some level. Well, The Cave is an idea that I've had for about 25 years. And it started out as these 3 characters that went into this sentient talking cave, but they were these 3 Indiana Jones type characters. I didn't have the eclectic group of 7 characters. And it's an idea that I think about, you know, every year or so. It kind of pop into my head. I think about it a little bit. And a couple of years ago, I was just thinking about it again, just starting to write a little, you know, just little stuff down. And then I was just hanging out with Tim, and you know, I told him the idea, and he really liked it, and said, "Why don't you, you know, come and let Double Fine make that game?" So yeah, it seemed I wasn't doing anything else, so it's great. The essence of the cave is that in everybody's heart, mine and yours, his, everyone's, there's a little dark spot. And to me, the interesting thing about the cave is just exploring those odd decisions that we make in our lives, that you make the small decision and your life just takes this whole 90-degree turn, and you know, your life could turn out one way or turn out another, and it's really just about those little stories for these 7 characters. Well, the overall design process was very similar to the other adventure games I made. It is, you know, at its core, it is an adventure game. There are lots of, you know, really good adventure game puzzles in there. You know, one of the challenges was there's no inventory in the cave. And designing games like Maniac Mansion or Monkey Island, we could really rely on the inventory. We could just load people up with items. It almost became a puzzle to have to scroll through your inventory to find the right thing. And losing the inventory was probably the largest design challenge, you know, that we faced. There were 2 other designers on the game, you know, JP and Dave Gardner, and you know, we would meet for 3 or 4 hours a day and just go through and design all this stuff. And it's probably the lack of inventory that was the hardest thing to overcome. The core gameplay, I'd say, is pretty similar. You are solving puzzles. The one big difference is that the other thing I wanted to eliminate besides inventory was I wanted to make moving around the world something that was fun. So, you know, so just walking from one place to another in a point-and-click adventure game can sometimes get a little bit boring. And I wanted to add this very, very light platforming element to the game. So you were running and you were jumping over things and you were hanging on ropes, but it's really not a part of the game. You know, you're never going to miss jumps, you never have to time anything, but it does make moving around the world, I think it makes moving around the world a lot more fun. I think there's still something very compelling about standard point-and-click adventure games and the inventory and, you know, walking around. And Double Fine is doing a standard point-and-click adventure game with the whole Kickstarter project. So I think when you play that, you know, it will feel like a nice classic point-and-click adventure games, but I think you will see some streamlining in some things in that game. So yeah, I think it's very possible to make a successful point-and-click. I would love to remake Maniac Mansion. Just, you know, kind of modernize the graphics a little bit, fix a couple of the really stupid puzzles, you know, that we had in there because we didn't really know what we were doing back then. So that's one thing I'd like to do. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd really like to make a proper Monkey Island 3 as a real point-and-click adventure game that really feels like it's a sequel of the first 2 games. You know, not a sequel of the other ones. You know, that's something I would love to do at some point.